So today we're going to be talking about kind of going further into your ePortfolio, how to really craft that portfolio and tell your story. My name is Elle Tyson. I'm the Assistant Director for ePortfolio and Digital Initiatives in the Office of High Impact Academic Partnerships. And then I also have here with me some of our ePortfolio assistants, Cami, Layla, Gray, and Sanjana. And when we get to the activities, we might do some breakout rooms. It really depends on, what people want to do and how big of a group we are. But they'll be available and, checking out the chat as we go. And if we do breakout rooms, we'll have people to send into the breakout rooms. All right. So just as a reminder of what an ePortfolio is, this is a more advanced workshop, but I always like to just go back to the basics just to make sure. So what an ePortfolio is usually, now it's in the form of a website, but it's not just a website. It's where you are making decisions of what you want to include, what are the best examples of your work that show your skills, that show your experience. And it's also a place for you to practice articulating those skills and experiences and making connections between all of those things. So that is really what it is that you're doing in your ePortfolio. So most of you are probably here for the Career Pathways ePortfolio. So there are a couple of different ones that you can do. You can either do the Preparing Future Faculty, depending on what your, what your end goals are, or the Preparing Future Professionals. So these portfolios always will have your CV for the faculty, your resume, for the professionals. They're just slightly different formats depending on the field that you're going in. You'll have those reflections on the participation in the professional development activities, your reflection on, work experience, internship, mentored teaching experience, depending on which one you do. And then for the Preparing Future Professionals, you also have to do that individual development plan. But so these are the main things that are required for that portfolio, but it's not the only thing that can go in that portfolio if you're hoping to make it kind of your larger portfolio that you can use for, moving on in your graduate studies. So say you're, getting your master's and moving on to your PhD, you can use it for those applications, but also for job applications in either one, a faculty position or, alt-ac professional position. All right. So part of making your portfolio is really knowing your message and knowing your audience. And by this, we mean when you're making those decisions about what to include, what maybe is a good example or not a good example, everything that you put in there, you're going to be thinking about it, asking these questions. So knowing your message, what is it that you want to show someone about you? What do you want to communicate about yourself? So what particular skills and expertise that you have? What do you want someone to think, about your personality, your creativity, that kind of thing. And a lot of that is done visually in an ePortfolio. Some of it is, a lot of it is what you write, but a lot of it is also, the visual decisions that you're making. And then you also want to be thinking about your particular audience. So who is it that you want to see this portfolio? So if you're in a particular field, you want to know what are their skills and expertise, what keywords and jargon will they understand, is there any of that that you need to explain a little bit more? Or are there certain words that the general population might not understand, but people in your field would already know what they are, and it would be kind of weird if you went into a long explanation. But one thing that's really important to think about once you're really thinking about your audience is making sure that there aren't institution specific things in your portfolio. Sometimes we'll see students, and if they've made a portfolio for a course or something like that, there's it's very obvious that their audience is someone who knows exactly what the course was, exactly what they were asked to do, and that kind of thing. But if your audience is not the teacher of the course or the assignment or the experience, you really need to be able to explain what that is, not use like ODU codes for things like, just for example, like English 110 does not mean anything to someone outside of ODU. They don't necessarily know what class that is. So making sure that you name what the class is and explain things to people who wouldn't necessarily be familiar with it. And then think about the general like personality, voice, and tone of the type of people that you're trying to reach, what will connect with them. So this is the part where you have to do a little bit of work with kind of how much do you want to be like stand out and be yourself and all of that, and how much do you want to fit in with the particular field that you're going into. So you don't have to go really extreme either way, but you can kind of find that balance of standing out enough, being true to yourself while also showing that you're capable of understanding how a field works, understanding, what might not work so well for that field. For example, sometimes we'll have people, who have really bright colors, really colorful, but they're going into a field that appreciates more subdued visuals, like, some of our like civil engineering aren't necessarily going to want a really, really colorful website. But then say your plans are to be a primary school teacher, you can be very colorful in your portfolio. So, and, having a really monotone website might actually be a detriment if you're in a field like that. So just showing that you're aware of how the field works, how you're going to be perceived through the choices that you make in your portfolio. All right. So we are going to do a little activity about how to craft your message for your audience. So, think about who you're intending for your audience to be. And this is really just for that initial part of your website where you are first, you're making that first impression to someone of who you are, what you stand for, what you're trying to do. So the questions that I have here for you to answer are, you're going to come up with 3 words that describe yourself. But the questions to kind of think about to come up with it is, how do you see yourself as a professional? What role do you play? How would you describe yourself within your field? And what values might you convey quickly to someone? So I have a few examples. I will trying to think if I'll just pull them up because really you're just looking at those 3 words. So let me see. Oh, all right. So we have a few examples. So Caitlin has finder, engineer, storyteller as her 3 words. Then we have scientist, team builder, explorer as the 3 words. We have systems leader, design strategist, ecosystems entrepreneur. And I know technically that's more than 3 words, but 3 terms, 3 phrases. And then we also have Anna here, historian of science, museum professional, and storyteller. So these are just examples of, you know, some students doing this work of making sure that when you go to their portfolio, boom, you see those 3 words, you kind of have an idea of, what they stand for, who they are, what they're going for. All right. So just take a few minutes to do this. I will go ahead and mute to give you guys a little bit of time to do this activity. And then you can put it in the chat, or, after a few minutes, if you want to unmute and, say what your 3 words are, you can. And then we'll move on to the next activity. All right. Was anyone able to think of what 3 words they might want to use? And like I said, feel free to put it in the chat, open up your mic, and chat with us. All right, we have geologist, researcher, educator. Nice. Yeah, mine on my website are scholar, instructor, administrator. So the order that you do them in kind of shows, whatever the first word is probably the thing that you think is the most important, down to, the last thing. You think they're all important, that's why you chose them. But that first word is really the one that is the most important to you. So thanks, Noah. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next activity. It's related to this. So some people do the 3 words. Some people think, that's a little too restrictive. So you can also do what we call an elevator pitch. This is something, really quick. Part of the thing with the website is you want someone to get a pretty good idea of, what you're all about really quickly. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more in your portfolio than just these, but this is what is kind of like the hook that draws someone in. So for the elevator pitch, you're going to think through, kind of your philosophy, your statement of purpose, kind of, what is it that you want to do? So a structure that you can think of is, who are you? What do you do? What's your unique area of interest? And what are your goals for your work? So like your main goals for what you want to do for your work. And I'm going to show you Anna's example. She actually has both of these. So she has the 3 words, but if you scroll down, she has this sentence: I'm a historian and a museum professional who uses objects to tell stories about the past. So that is kind of her, her elevator pitch there. And then we have Yaitza, who it's kind of it's like a shortened version of the elevator pitch. She's kind of like combined both of these, but she is someone who is achieving realistic impact through self-empowerment. That is what she's going for. That is what she's trying to do. So these are just a couple of examples for the elevator pitch. 1 sentence description: who are you? What do you do? What's your particular unique area of interest and your goal for your work? So I'll give you guys just a few minutes to do this one, and then we'll move on. All right. If you came up with your sentence, you can go ahead and pop it in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and move on so we don't run out of time. for our next part of the presentation. So we talked a little bit about, that first impression that you're making on your portfolio, but the real meat of the portfolio is really the evidence that you're going to put in there of your learning, of your experience. So there's a lot of stuff on the slide. We like to just have a lot of examples. Sometimes people get really hung up on the written work aspect of what they should put in their portfolio. So really all they can think of is, papers and essays. That's the only thing that would be, an example of their work. But in addition to, papers, research projects, all of that stuff, you can have professional goal statements, for the for preparing future professionals. That's one of the requirements. You can have longer reflective essays, you can have journal or blog entries, and your experience can go beyond just what you're doing in your courses. You can have, internship or work experience, group projects that you've done, times you've been in leadership roles, community service, volunteer work, good examples of when you've had to do some problem solving, anything like that that shows that you have particular skills that you're able to do, are really important to include. And then for audio visuals, pictures of you doing things, but that's not the only thing you can include. Depending on your field, you could have, spreadsheet, database projects, graphs, information charts, concept diagrams, infographics, timelines. For example, we had a student who, you know, his path was a little bit kind of all over the place, and he was trying to figure out how to show someone how everything went together. And he actually created a timeline that showed, kind of what he was doing at different points, and then explained how all of those things over that timeline are what brought him to where he was now. So he used that visual of a timeline to help him do his explanation. So just you can be creative with thinking about how to use your audio visuals. And then, of course, if you have any awards or honors, or you're part of any professional organizations. So these are all examples of the evidence, or what we call artifacts, that you could include in your portfolio. So I want to give you a minute to kind of brainstorm what specific artifacts that you might share in your portfolio. So what artifacts do you already have? What might you gather over time? How easily are they shared? Would you need to protect any of that information in the artifacts? And then what might those artifacts demonstrate to an unfamiliar audience? And what value do those artifacts provide to the audience? So, why would they be a good example of, the work that you do, the skills that you have, what you're trying to show that you're able to do? So just think of one or two artifacts that you might want to include in your portfolio, or that you have already decided you want to include in your portfolio, and just think a little bit about, why you chose that artifact. All right, I will give you guys about 4 minutes to kind of think about this. All right. So for the recording, I just want to read one of the elevator pitches from the chat. That's a really good one. I am a public administration professional, passionate about building resilient communities through research, inclusive policy, and hands-on collaboration that empowers underserved populations. Great. And I mean, I think you guys can kind of see how just in that, one sentence, it really, someone has a pretty good idea of what it is that you're trying to do. So that's really all that we were trying to do with those 3 words and those elevator pitches. But thank you for that great example. We're going to work more with the artifacts that you've thought of. So I'm actually going to move on before I ask you to kind of share what artifacts you're thinking of. But we're going to talk a little bit about how you do context setting for your artifacts and evidence and how you do the reflection for them. All right. So part of what ePortfolios really are is this reflective aspect. So you can have, a website that just shows some of your work, but if you don't have the explanation of why it's important and what you learn from it, you're not really making something that's um, a really useful or impactful e-portfolio. So this is a quote by a researcher, but it really just encapsulates why reflection is important. So the reflection is to make meaning and to make connections and have those relationships and continuities in the story that you're trying to tell. And really, you know, making that meaning is part of what it means to be human and to be a person. It's what helps us make sense of things and show what is important, show what has value in our lives. So that is really what you're doing when you're picking these particular artifacts and evidence and then reflecting on them. You are sharing with other people who come to your portfolio parts of yourself and why these particular things are important to you and what they can show to someone else. All right. So before you get to really the bulk of the reflection, you need to do what we call context setting. And this is where you are going to explain what the artifact is, how you came to create it. This goes back a little bit to that part where your audience isn't the instructor who asked you to make this. So you need to actually explain if it was for a particular course, what you were asked to do for the assignment, that kind of thing. Relate it to the course, the assignment, or experience. Sometimes it's not necessarily an assignment that you've been given, but you don't want someone to sit there looking at an example in your portfolio and you don't want them to have a lot of questions. You want to pretty much explain most of what you're trying to show them. One exercise that I have students do sometimes is you can do it with an actual person there, or you can just imagine that you're pulling up your portfolio and showing it to someone. And anything that you feel the need or the instinct to verbally explain to them as they're looking at it on your portfolio, that should be included in whatever you write in your portfolio. You're not always going to be sitting there walking someone through and explaining things to them. So that's just a really good exercise to kind of find gaps in how you've explained things. You also want to situate that artifact in your overall narrative, the overall story that you're telling. So, how does it relate to what you were asked to do, but also how does it relate to your whole portfolio, the whole purpose of what you're trying to show through your whole portfolio? It doesn't have to be really long. It can just be a few sentences that explains what that artifact is. You don't want someone to come to it and be like, "Oh, I wonder why they put that there. What is this assignment about? I don't understand." The worst thing is when we see someone's portfolio and they just have a paper there. No explanation of what they were asked to do, the course, generally what it's about or anything like that. So, you just want to be kind to your viewer and make sure that you're explaining exactly, you know, everything that you need to explain about that evidence, that artifact. All right. So then the reflection part, and these can be combined. You can have a few sentences that are the context setting and then go into the reflection. But they're serving different purposes. So we like to kind of separate them out so that, you know, you know what it is that you're trying to do with each of them. So in a reflection, you really want to explain why that artifact is a good representation of that course, that assignment, that experience. So why is this evidence that you're putting in there, how does that demonstrate what it is that you want to show you got out of those? You want to outline any new skills that you have gained through doing this activity, or skills you already had that you improved upon or got to practice by making that artifact or having that experience. So thinking in terms of skills is fairly important in reflection. That's something that we see, a lot of employers are looking for, and even grad schools. Do you have these research skills, complex thinking skills, that kind of thing. You're doing what we call metacognitive work. You don't need to remember the term metacognitive, but basically, you want to think about your thinking, think about the process of making it. You can point out anything that was particularly easy or difficult about completing it. And if something was difficult, how did you overcome that difficulty? What were you able to learn from that? New skills that you have because of it, or just, practicing something that you already knew how to do. And then for easy, if something was really easy, what pre-existing skills aided you? You can even talk a little bit about why you had those skills in the first place. And then you also want to usually include something in your reflection about how you can use those skills, these experiences that you've had, through a course or an assignment. How will you be able to apply those in the future, and the rest of your academic journey, or in your future career? So thinking about, now that I've done this, I will be able to do this other thing in the future because I, had that experience and was able to do that. So that is kind of, what you're thinking about when you write a reflection. Usually reflections are longer than the context setting, but they don't have to be super long. I would say longer reflections. Sometimes people will do kind of an overall reflection on, their whole program or something like that, or on everything that's in the portfolio so that you can bring it together. Those can be a little bit longer, but the reflections that go with each artifact don't need to be super duper long. You don't need someone to just be reading and reading and reading before they get to the actual artifact. But you do want to think about a little bit of this, to show that you're able to think through how you're doing stuff. So not just that you're able to complete this assignment, but that you're aware of how you managed to complete the assignment and what steps you had to take to be able to complete the assignment. It's a little bit like in math when they say show your work. That's a little bit what you're doing with your reflection in an ePortfolio. All right. So this is the longer activity that we're going to do. So I want you to think about, pick one of the artifacts that you thought of earlier that you want to use in your portfolio, or maybe one that you're already using in your portfolio, but maybe you haven't done really extensive context setting or reflection for it. So I have all of these questions here. They basically follow, the definition of what context setting and reflection are. What is it? Why and how did you make it? How's it related to, course assignment or experience that you're connecting it with? and how does it enhance the story of your overall portfolio? And then for the reflection, why is it a good representation of it? What new skills have you gained? What previous skills have you improved upon? What was particularly easy or difficult about it? And then how will you use those skills in the future and the rest of your academic journey or your career? So I'm going to give you guys about we'll do about 10 minutes and then we'll come back and chat about it a little bit. I know that's not very long to work on it, but it just gives you a little bit of a taste of doing it. And obviously, you will still have I will send you guys the link to these slides, and I believe Dr. Youssef will send them out as well. But I'll make sure to drop those in the chat so you'll have, the set of questions for later on when you're working on your portfolio. But I'm going to go ahead and mute, let you guys work on these. Think about the artifact that you want to do. All right. I don't want to put anyone on the spot to, go through this whole thing for your artifact unless you want some feedback on it. But I just want to put it out there. How easy was it for you to do this and answer these questions about your artifact that you chose? Were you already doing some of this work, or is some of this stuff that you never thought about needing to include in your portfolio?
Like whatever you just mentioned, like for me personally, I think coming from a very research intensive background and looking forward to go in the faculty job market or maybe in a research scientist position, I think one thing I always struggle with is, how I can communicate the complex thing even to our audience who might not be from a very technical background. So from that perspective, sometimes I do think like whatever website I have come up with, I don't know how good I am to reach out to a general audience, or even I send it. If I even send it to my mom, I'm not pretty sure whether she will be able to get it or not. Trust me, especially my mom and dad, sometimes they do even struggle to even understand, okay, what you're working with, But um, sometimes I think that's one of the key points for me, being a researcher or an educator, being to tell my story and able to connect to humans, rather than
Yes,
whatever the AI and everything is going on, which is okay. But I
exactly. And that's a really important part of portfolios is that you cannot really make a good portfolio with AI. Like it really has to be personal. That's why I like the reflection and context setting because, say you've done the same assignment as another student, maybe the actual results of the assignment are fairly similar, but your process of doing it, what you got out of it will be very different. So, just thinking of what you want to share. And that's a good example of knowing your audience. So if you, it does make sense. So if you want to go into teaching and you might want to teach people who are not as familiar with things yet, it would be a good idea to test out your portfolio on people who aren't as familiar with the field. But sometimes for people who are more interested in the research side, they don't have to think about that quite as much because they know that their main audience is a lot of other researchers who know about what it is that they're explaining. So this is where it's really important to think about your audience. But yeah, I use my mom and dad to test things out on sometimes too, to be like, okay, what doesn't make sense to you about this? What might I need to explain a little bit more? So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and really, I just wanted to take the moment and thank you. That was really helpful. The link you
Good.
shared, the slides, and also like taking an appointment. And I already take it, so hopefully I'll be able to learn more. Then, thank you
Perfect.
so
Yeah.
much.
All right. Well, I'm going to move on to the rest of the presentation. It's really just letting you know how to use our resources. I already shared the link to making appointments, but on the slideshow, there's links to a lot of other things. We have our written tutorials, video tutorials. We also have a gallery of examples. And then we have some starting guides for making a website in Canva, in Wix or in WordPress. And we do provide online tutoring, face-to-face tutoring. We have some open studio sessions. Those are Mondays at 11:30 and Tuesdays at 4:30. And then we also offer asynchronous support where you give us your link, we'll pull it up and make a video through Zoom of us going through your portfolio and giving you feedback as we go through it. All right, and these are just a few examples. I'm not gonna, pull them up. We only have a few minutes left, but Canva is a choice that you can use for building your website. The way that you build it in Canva is basically, it's kind of like a slideshow as you build it, and then the result is a website. So each slide is kind of just its own section in the website. But if you know how to build a slideshow, you can build a portfolio in Canva. And then we also have ODU WordPress. We don't use it quite as much, but I do like to still mention it in the career pathways workshops because there are templates that you can activate in WordPress created specifically for this program. And the benefit of using ODU WordPress is that there are lots of plugins available that you can activate that increase the functionality of your website. And then once you graduate, you are able to export the file and import it onto regular WordPress. So I like to just put it out there as an option. It does have some limitations to kind of the storage and what you can put on there. But it's a good idea to, try out different platforms and see if it's one that you want to use. And then we also have Wix as an ePortfolio platform option. This is not through ODU, but it is still a free, really powerful website builder that you can use. It has a lot of design options. And then if you want to get a template of that one, there's no way for you to just automatically create the template like there is in WordPress, but you can request that we create create a copy of it and send it to you. So if you're doing PFF or PFP and you want the template, you can go to this link to our form. It's a really short form. You can request that ODU Wix site and just ask for PFF or PFP depending on which program you're doing. And if you decide to go this route, just remember that we do have to see that request and do it. So allow for 48 hours, a little bit longer over the weekend. And then you have to accept that transfer. So you do need to be looking out in your email for that Wix notification that that website's being transferred to you and then accept the transfer. But so that is an option if you think you might want to use Wix for your website. And then we're located in the ePortfolio studio, which is room 1313 and the Library Learning Commons. And you can always email us eportfolio@odu.edu with any questions. Again, you can make appointments with us as well. But if you just have a really short question that you want to ask, you can always email us.